I slammed my hand on the casket and screamed her name. Right there, in front of the pastor, the mourners, the flowers. I lost it completely. Because my phone was ringing, and the name on the screen stopped my heart cold. Jonathan Pierce, CEO. Pierce Global Industries. The most powerful man in Pennsylvania was calling me a 63-year-old maintenance worker on the exact minute we were lowering my wife into the ground. That call didn't just interrupt her funeral. It rewrote everything I thought I knew about the last year of Elizabeth's life. And what he told me, I almost didn't survive hearing it. Drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far Elizabeth's story has traveled. And if you're new here, subscribe. You won't want to miss what comes next. I want you to understand something before I tell you this story. I am not a dramatic man. I never have been. For 35 years, I woke up before sunrise, pulled on my work boots, drove 40 minutes to a manufacturing plant outside Pittsburgh, and did my job. I fixed things. Machines, pipelines, broken equipment. I was the man you called when something stopped working and you needed it running again before the morning shift arrived. I didn't give speeches. I didn't make scenes. I handled problems quietly, practically, and without complaint. That was Daniel Whitmore. That was who I was. So when I tell you that I broke down in front of 200 people at my wife's funeral, that I slammed my palm against her casket so hard the wood shook, I need you to understand what it took to get me there. I need you to understand what she meant to me. Elizabeth Ann Whitmore, 61 years old when she died. Brown hair that had gone silver at the temples in the last few years, and she wore it that way proudly. She used to say silver hair meant you'd earned something. She had reading glasses. She was constantly losing a laugh that started quiet, and then took over the whole room, and a way of looking at you when you were lying to yourself that made excuses feel physically impossible. We met when I was 24, and she was 23. A church social in a town so small it only had one stoplight. She was wearing a yellow dress and arguing with the pastor about something I couldn't hear, and I remember thinking, whoever that woman is arguing with a pastor and winning, I need to know her name. 3 years later, she became Elizabeth Whitmore. 38 years. That's how long she was my wife. 38 years of arguments about the thermostat. 38 years of her stealing the blanket and denying it every single morning. 38 years of her being the person who knew, without me saying a word, when something was eating at me, and who would sit down across from me with a cup of coffee and just wait until I was ready to talk. I didn't deserve her. I knew that. She knew it too. She teased me about it regularly. Daniel Whitmore. She used to say, "I have no idea what I saw in you." And then she'd smile, and I'd know exactly what she saw. Elizabeth got sick 14 months before she died. Pancreatic cancer. If you know anything about that disease, you know how the sentence ends before it begins. The doctors were honest with us. Clinical but kind, the way good doctors learn to be. They talked about treatment options, about timelines, about quality of life. And underneath every word was the truth none of us said out loud. We had maybe a year. We used every day of it. I took whatever overtime pay I'd saved and we drove down the East Coast in September, stopping at every roadside diner in State Park we'd always meant to visit and never had. Elizabeth made me pull over somewhere in coastal Georgia because she wanted to eat gas station boiled peanuts, which she had never tried in her life, and she sat on the hood of our car eating them out of a paper bag and laughing at herself for waiting so long. That's the image I hold on to now. Yellow oak trees. Her silver hair in the wind. That laugh taking over. She kept working as long as she could. Elizabeth had been the personal executive assistant to Jonathan Pierce for nearly 20 years. Pierce Global Industries was, and still is, one of the largest privately held manufacturing conglomerates in Pennsylvania. Jonathan Pierce was the kind of man whose name appeared in newspapers for charitable donations and business deals that reshaped entire regional economies. He was also genuinely one of the most decent men I had ever met. I say that not as flattery. I say it because I watched him. People reveal themselves over 20 years, and Jonathan Pierce revealed himself to be a man who treated the people around him, all of them, not just the ones with power, with respect and fairness. He called Elizabeth his anchor. Daniel, he told me once at a company Christmas party years back, standing by the bar with a glass of sparkling water, because he didn't drink. Your wife is the only person in a building full of yes-men who has ever walked into my office and told me I was wrong. Do you have any idea what that's worth? I told him I did. I'd been married to her for decades. I knew exactly what it was worth. Elizabeth worked part-time through the fall and into early winter, going in on the days her body allowed it, because she said the routine kept her feeling like herself. Jonathan accommodated everything. Flexible hours, car service to and from. No pressure, no questions about when she'd be back or whether she'd be back. In early November, she stopped going in. She died on the morning of November 19th, quietly in the hospital with me holding her left hand and the chaplain reading from the Psalms. Her last words to me, and I have turned them over in my mind every day since, were, "Daniel, promise me something." Anything, I said. Name it. She looked at me with those clear gray eyes that had never once lied to me in 38 years. Don't believe everything people tell you, after I'm gone. Promise me. I thought she was speaking from fear. The way sick people sometimes do near the end, the mind circling back, looking for reassurance for safety. I squeezed her hand. I promise, I said. She closed her eyes. I had no idea she was giving me a warning. The funeral was held 6 days later. My daughter Emily organized most of it. She was 34, living about 20 minutes away in a house she shared with her husband, Ryan Carter. Emily had Elizabeth's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn streak, which had always made me proud. She was smart-driven and had launched a small home goods business 3 years prior that had unfortunately collapsed in the second year. The pandemic had gutted the market. It wasn't her fault. These things happen. Ryan Carter was her husband of 5 years. Tall, broad-shouldered, always dressed a little too well for the occasion. The kind of man who called you "sir" while shaking your hand and looked you directly in the eyes with an expression so practiced it almost felt genuine. Almost. I had never been able to name what bothered me about Ryan Carter. He did nothing wrong exactly. He said the right things. He showed up when he was supposed to. He remembered birthdays and brought wine to dinners and asked polite questions about my work. But there was something underneath all of it that I could never quite put my finger on. A calculation behind the manners. Like every kind gesture was a ledger entry. Elizabeth never said anything directly. But I noticed that she smiled at Ryan, the way she smiled at colleagues she was professionally courteous to, not the way she smiled at people she loved. I filed it away, didn't pursue it. We all have people in our lives we tolerate for the sake of people we love. The morning of the funeral was gray and cold, the way November in Pennsylvania knows how to be not dramatic cold, just relentless, the kind that gets into your collar and stays there. 200 people came. People from the plant where I worked. People from Elizabeth's office, including several of Jonathan Pierce's executive team. Neighbors, church friends. A woman Elizabeth had worked with 30 years ago who had driven from Ohio that morning just to be there. I stood at the front and I shook hands and I said thank you because that was what you did, and inside I felt like I was watching myself from a very long distance. Like the real Daniel Whitmore had gone somewhere quiet and left a polite functional copy behind to accept condolences. Ryan stayed close to me all morning. He kept his hand on my shoulder at intervals. He guided me through the room. He spoke quietly to people on my behalf when I couldn't find words. At the time I thought he was being a good son-in-law. Now I understand that he was watching me, monitoring, making sure I was still in the dark. The burial was at a small cemetery attached to a Lutheran church where Elizabeth had occasionally attended services. Simple plot her name and dates on a gray granite stone we'd picked together back in October on one of her good days because she insisted on being part of the decision. I've been organizing things for other people my entire career, she'd said, sitting in the funeral director's office with her coat on because she was always cold by then. I am not leaving my own headstone to chance. She'd picked the scripture inscription herself. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. Proverbs 31:26. They were lowering the casket. The pastor was speaking. Behind me, I could hear Emily crying, and the sound of it went through me like a blade, because she was my daughter, and her grief was real, and I loved her, and I didn't know yet what I know now. That was when my phone vibrated in my coat pocket. I ignored it. It vibrated again. I reached in and looked at the screen, just to silence it, and then I stopped. Jonathan Pierce. I stared at it. Jonathan Pierce had been at the funeral home that morning. He had embraced me and told me Elizabeth was the finest person he'd ever worked with, and that the world was smaller without her. He had left before the burial, I'd assumed, because his schedule demanded it, because men like Jonathan always had somewhere they had to be. But he was calling me now. Right now. At the exact moment they were lowering my wife into the ground. Jonathan Pierce had never called my personal cell phone in 20 years. Not once. I stepped back from the grave. Someone touched my arm, I don't know who. I held up one finger and turned away and answered the call. Jonathan? Daniel. His voice was wrong, low, careful, stripped of the confidence he carried like a second suit. Are you at the cemetery? They're putting her in the ground right now, I said. My own voice sounded like it was coming from somewhere else. Jonathan, what is this? A pause. I'm sorry to call now, but I've been sitting with this for 2 days, trying to figure out the right moment, and I don't think there is one, and you need to know. My chest tightened. Know what? I found something, in Elizabeth's office. Another pause, shorter, more deliberate. She hid something for you, Daniel, a box, with your name on it. I turned further away from the group. I pressed the phone harder against my ear. What kind of box? Documents, he said. Records. And a letter. Daniel, she left instructions that if she passed, I was to give it directly to you, and only to you. She was very specific about that part. Why would she? There's something else. His voice dropped further. I also found recordings. Conversations she saved on her office computer. I've listened to enough of them to understand that Elizabeth was aware before she died that someone close to you was planning something significant. The sounds of the funeral felt very far away. The pastor's voice, the wind through the cemetery trees, Emily crying somewhere behind me. Planning something, I repeated. What do you mean, planning something? I don't want to say more over the phone. Firm now, decisive. The other Jonathan, the CEO, coming back into his voice underneath the fear. I need you to come to my office. Today, if you can. Tonight, if you can't. I stood there at the edge of my wife's grave with my phone pressed to my face, and I tried to make my mind work. Jonathan, tell me one thing. Right now, is this about money? In part, he said. But Daniel, it's bigger than money. Elizabeth didn't just find financial records. She found a pattern, and she was frightened enough to hide the evidence and record her own conversations because she didn't know who else she could tell. The cold went through me then, not the November cold, something deeper. She could have told me, I said. A pause. She wanted to protect you, Jonathan said quietly. She said, and I'm reading from the note she left me, she said, Daniel has carried enough weight in this life. I will not put this on him until I know the full truth. And if I don't make it long enough to tell him myself, make sure he hears it from you. I lowered the phone from my ear for a moment. 38 years. She was still protecting me at the end, still carrying things alone so I wouldn't have to. I put the phone back up. There's one more thing, Jonathan said. And I need you to hear me carefully. Go ahead. When you come, do not tell Emily, and do not tell Ryan. The air went out of me. Jonathan. Daniel. His voice was very quiet now, very still. Please, trust me. Elizabeth was very clear on this point too. The note says, tell no one in the immediate family, especially not Ryan. I stood at my wife's graveside. Her coffin was in the earth. 200 people were 20 feet behind me. My son-in-law was among them, hand on Emily's shoulder, looking exactly like a man who had nothing to hide. And my wife, who had known every corner of my heart for 38 years, had used her last weeks on earth to secretly build a case against someone close to us, and left it in the hands of her boss to make sure I survived it. "I'll come tonight," I said. "Thank you," Jonathan said. I hung up. I stood there for another moment with the phone in my hand and the wind in my face, and Elizabeth 3 feet below me in the ground. "Don't believe everything people tell you." That's what she'd said. Not because she was afraid of dying, because she was afraid of what would happen to me after she was gone. And she was right to be afraid. I turned around and walked back toward the group. Ryan looked up when I approached and gave me a nod, quiet, sympathetic asking without asking if I was okay. I nodded back. I smiled the way a man smiles when he's grieving and doesn't want to make a scene. But inside, for the first time since Elizabeth got sick, something had shifted. The grief was still there. It would be there for the rest of my life. But underneath it now, something else had woken up. Something cold and clear and patient. The part of me that fixed broken things. The part of me that had spent 35 years figuring out what was wrong with a system before the damage spread. The part of me that did not quit. Elizabeth had trusted me to be that man. Even now. Especially now. I took my place at the graveside. I watched them finish. I said goodbye to my wife, and I waited for the night. The box Jonathan Pierce handed me that evening contained 11 documents, 4 handwritten letters, and a single USB drive. It took me 4 hours to understand what Elizabeth had built. And when I finally did, I sat in Jonathan's office at 11 o'clock at night, and I said one sentence. "How long has this been going on?" Jonathan looked at me across the desk. "Based on what she found," he said, "we believe it started the month after her diagnosis. The month after they knew she was dying. Someone had started the clock the moment Elizabeth got sick, and they had used every day of her illness to set the trap." Jonathan Pierce's office was on the 14th floor of a building in downtown Pittsburgh, and I had been inside it maybe 3 times in 20 years. Always for company events. Always with Elizabeth beside me whispering names in my ear because she knew I was terrible with faces. Always feeling like a man who had wandered into a room built for someone else. That night I walked in alone. It was past 7 o'clock. The building was empty except for a security guard at the front desk, who clearly knew I was coming because he waved me through without a word and pointed me toward the elevator. The lobby was all polished stone and low light, and my work boots made sounds on the floor that felt too loud for the silence. Jonathan was standing when I walked in, not sitting behind his desk the way powerful men usually position themselves when they want you to feel the difference in your circumstances. He was standing at the window with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up and a look on his face that I had never seen on him before. He looked tired. Not the tired that comes from a long day. The tired that comes from carrying something heavy for too long and finally being allowed to set it down. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You didn't give me much of a choice," I said. He almost smiled. "No, I suppose I didn't." He gestured toward the chair across from his desk, and I sat, and he sat, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. There was a wooden box on the desk between us. About the size of a shoebox, dark mahogany with a small brass latch. The kind of box you'd keep important papers in, or old photographs, or the things you weren't ready to throw away but couldn't bear to look at every day. On the top, in Elizabeth's handwriting, in blue ink, in the careful block letters she used when she wanted something to be absolutely legible for Daniel. "Only open if I am gone." I stared at it for a long time. "She brought it to me 6 weeks ago," Jonathan said. "She asked me to keep it in my personal safe. She said if she recovered, she'd come back for it and handle things herself. And if she didn't..." He stopped, cleared his throat. "She made me promise to put it directly in your hands. Not Emily. Not Ryan. Not a lawyer. You." "Did she tell you what was in it?" "She told me enough." He leaned forward, elbows on the desk, fingers laced together. "Daniel, I want to be honest with you about something before you open that box. The things inside it, they're going to hurt. Not because of what Elizabeth did, because of what she found. And I need you to be prepared for the possibility that what you thought you knew about the last year of your life was not entirely what it appeared to be. I looked at him steadily. Jonathan, my wife died this morning. I buried her 6 hours ago. There is nothing in that box that can hurt me more than today already has. He held my gaze for a moment. Then he nodded slowly and slid the box across the desk toward me. I undid the brass latch. I opened it. The first thing I saw was the letter. White envelope, my name on the front in Elizabeth's handwriting, sealed. I set it aside. I wasn't ready for that yet. I needed to see the shape of the whole thing before I could read her words, and I started going through the rest. There were documents, 11 of them printed and neatly ordered with paper clips dividing them into sections. Financial records, account statements, a copy of our retirement account summary from 14 months ago, right before Elizabeth's diagnosis, and then another copy from 3 months ago. And when I set them side by side, I felt a cold sensation begin at the base of my spine and move upward very slowly. The numbers were wrong. Not catastrophically wrong. Not obviously screaming wrong. Just quietly, incrementally, carefully wrong in the way that things get when someone is paying very close attention to how much you're paying attention. How much, I said. In total, Jonathan said, based on what Elizabeth calculated, somewhere between $60,000 and $80,000. Possibly more. The transfers were small and spread across 14 months. Nothing large enough to trigger an automatic flag. $60,000 to $80,000. That was most of what we had. We weren't wealthy people. I had a pension coming, and Social Security, and the retirement account we'd been building since our 40s. That account was supposed to be our old age, the thing between us, and having to ask our daughter for help. Where did it go? I said. That's where it gets complicated. Jonathan reached into the desk drawer and pulled out a folder separate from the box. Elizabeth tracked 3 of the transfers to an LLC registered in Delaware, shell company. Very standard setup for someone who knows how to hide money and doesn't want to pay a professional to do it for them. Who registered the LLC? Jonathan opened the folder and turned it around so I could read it. The registered agent was a name I didn't recognize, but the contact address listed for the company's correspondence was a post office box in a suburb 20 minutes from my house. 20 minutes from my house. The suburb where Emily and Ryan lived. I set the paper down on the desk very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands are not entirely steady and you don't want anyone to see them shake. Jonathan, I said, how long have you known? I suspected something the week after Elizabeth came to me with the box, he said. I had my financial team do a quiet review of the documents she provided. It took them about 10 days to confirm the pattern. He paused. I am deeply sorry I didn't come to you sooner. Elizabeth asked me to wait until it was over. She was still hoping she was wrong. Was she wrong? He looked at me. No, he said. She was not wrong. I picked up the white envelope with my name on it. I opened it. Elizabeth's handwriting. 3 pages front and back in the small, neat script she'd used for 38 years on grocery lists and birthday cards and notes she'd leave on the bathroom mirror when I had an early shift, and she knew I'd forget to eat breakfast. My Daniel, if you're reading this, then I didn't get enough time to fix it myself. I'm sorry for that. I know this is not the goodbye you deserved, and I know reading these words when I'm not there to sit across from you and hold your hand is going to feel like the worst kind of wrong. But I need you to listen to me. I need you to hear me the way you heard me for 38 years, because what I'm about to tell you is the most important thing I have ever said. I stopped reading. I pressed my lips together. I looked at the ceiling for a moment. Jonathan said nothing. He just waited the way a decent man waits when someone else is at the edge of themselves and needs a second to pull back. After a moment, I kept reading. The money is the smallest part of it. I know that seems impossible to believe when you see those account statements, but it's true. The money can be recovered. What scared me, what kept me up at night in those hospital rooms when I should have been resting, was the other documents. The ones I found in Ryan's briefcase in April. I stopped again. She found something in Ryan's briefcase, I said aloud. Keep reading, Jonathan said quietly. I wasn't snooping. He had left it in our living room when they came for Easter, and I was clearing up after dinner, and it fell when I moved it to make room, and a folder slipped out. I wouldn't have thought anything of it. Ryan always has files with him. He's always working on something, except that I saw our names on the tab. Yours and mine. Daniel and Elizabeth Whitmore. And underneath that, the name of our bank. I took photographs with my phone before I put everything back. What I photographed were drafts. Unsigned forms. Medical power of attorney documents with your name on the signature line, and Ryan's name listed as the designated agent. A will amendment. Not the real one. Not the one we have on file with our attorney, but a different version with changes I never agreed to and never would have agreed to. He had prepared documents designed to give himself control over your finances and your medical decisions. In the event of my death, Daniel Ryan had paperwork ready to step in and take over your life. I put the letter down on the desk. I sat there. The room was very quiet. My mouth was dry. My hands were flat on the desk on either side of the letter. I was pressing them down hard, because that was the only way I could feel them. He had documents ready, I said, before she died. Yes, Jonathan said. He was preparing, while she was sick. He was preparing to... Yes. The word came out of me then that I hadn't said in 30 years, not since I was a young man with a shorter fuse and less reason to control it. I said it quietly into the surface of the desk, and Jonathan heard it and said nothing, because he understood. Then I picked the letter back up. I don't know yet how much Emily knows. That is the question that breaks my heart. Because your daughter loves you. I believe that with everything I have. But Ryan has had 5 years to work on her, and Emily has always trusted the people she loves without questioning them enough, and I am genuinely afraid that he has used that against her. I started recording conversations in October. I used my office computer because Ryan would never have access to it, and because Jonathan, God bless him, and I hope you'll let him help you, has the best security team in the state. Those recordings are on the USB drive in the box. Please listen to them. And Daniel, whatever you discover, please remember that I love you. Not because you were perfect. Not because our life was perfect. But because for 38 years, you were the truest, most decent man I knew, and whatever happens after I'm gone, that truth is yours. You fix things for a living. Fix this one. All my love forever. Elizabeth. I folded the letter. I put it back in the envelope. I put the envelope in my coat pocket against my chest. The USB drive, I said. My voice was steady. I was proud of that. I needed it to be steady. Can we listen to it now? I've already had my IT team transfer the audio files, Jonathan said. He reached for his laptop. There are 9 recordings, ranging from about 4 minutes to almost 40. Elizabeth labeled them by date. He turned the laptop to face me. I've listened to 5 of them. I'd like you to start with the 3rd one. Why the 3rd? Because, he said carefully, the 3rd one has Ryan's voice in it. I leaned forward. Jonathan pressed play. The recording was made in October, a Tuesday afternoon based on the file name. The audio quality was surprisingly clear. Elizabeth had used the computer microphone and somehow gotten the levels right, or maybe the acoustics of our living room just worked that way. At first it was just background sound, the television on low, the sound of dishes in the kitchen. Then Ryan's voice. Emily talked to the attorney today. A pause. Emily's voice. He said we have to wait. She has to. It has to be post-mortem before we can challenge anything. That's just how it works. Ryan again. That's what I told you. That's what I've been saying for 3 months. Patience. Emily. I hate this. She's right there, Ryan. She's my mother. And she's right there, and we're sitting here talking about... Ryan. We're talking about securing your future. Your father's future. Don't make it into something it isn't. Emily's voice got quieter. You really think Dad won't fight it? Ryan. Your dad is a good man. He trusts people. That's always been his weakness. A pause. Then Ryan again lower. Once she's gone, he's going to need someone to help him manage things. He won't know where to start. We just make sure we're that someone." The recording ended. The silence in Jonathan's office was absolute. I was aware of my own breathing, aware of the weight of my coat, aware of Elizabeth's letter in my pocket pressed against my ribs. "How long?" I said. "How long were they planning this?" "The earliest document we can trace," Jonathan said, "is from the week your wife received her diagnosis. 14 months ago. 14 months. They had started before Elizabeth lost her hair, before the first round of treatment, before she came home from the hospital that first night and sat across from me at the kitchen table and told me the news with the same quiet steadiness she brought to everything, because she knew if she stayed calm, it would help me stay calm. Before any of that. Ryan had seen the diagnosis and started planning. I thought about Easter Sunday. Ryan's briefcase on our living room floor. Elizabeth quietly photographing documents while the rest of us were in the kitchen. She had been doing that alone. She had been carrying that alone, while she was sick, while she was in treatment, while I sat next to her in doctors' offices thinking the only enemy in the room was the disease. She was protecting me, I said. Yes, Jonathan said. She knew I would lose my mind. She knew if she told me I'd confront Ryan directly, and she knew I'd burn the whole thing down before she had a chance to build the case. She told me as much, Jonathan said. She said, and I'm quoting here because I wrote it down. She said, "Daniel is the most honest man I know, which means he is genuinely terrible at this kind of thing. He needs to know the whole truth before he knows any of it." I almost laughed. It was the most Elizabeth thing she had ever said about me. And she had said it without me in the room in the last weeks of her life, and she was absolutely right. "Okay," I said. I straightened in the chair. I put both hands flat on the desk. "Okay, what do we do?" Jonathan looked at me for a moment. Then something changed in his expression, a kind of relief, like he'd been waiting to see which version of me walked in tonight, and this was the one he'd been hoping for. "I have a name," he said. "A former financial crimes investigator. His name is Marcus Reed. He's been doing private work for the last 4 years. I've used him twice, once for corporate espionage, and once for a situation involving a board member I won't get into." He paused. "He's the best I've ever worked with. He's discreet, he's thorough, and he doesn't stop until he has something airtight." "Call him," I said. "I already did," Jonathan said. "He can meet us Thursday morning." I nodded. Then I picked up the folder with the LLC registration, and I looked at it again. The address. The suburb. The neat, clean, anonymous post office box that Ryan had rented, so that the money from my retirement account would have somewhere to go when it disappeared. "Jonathan," I said, "there's something I need to ask you." "Anything." "Ryan was at the funeral today. He had his hand on my shoulder most of the morning." I set the folder down. "Does he have any reason to think that you have this box, that you've contacted me? Does he know anything?" Jonathan shook his head slowly. Elizabeth was very careful. She told no one except me. The box came in inside a bag from a restaurant she'd ordered lunch from. She didn't want anyone in the office to see her carrying something in. She told me on a day when my assistant was out sick, and she let herself in using her own key. He paused. "Ryan doesn't know this office exists as far as this situation is concerned." "Good," I said. "Daniel, what are you thinking?" I thought about it for a moment, about the hand on my shoulder at the funeral, about the sympathetic nod at the graveside, about Ryan saying to Emily 4 months ago in our living room with the television on, "Your dad is a good man. He trusts people. That's always been his weakness." "I'm thinking," I said slowly, "that the best thing I can do right now is let him keep believing that." Jonathan looked at me. "I'm thinking," I said, "that for the next however many weeks this takes, I go home. I grieve. I let him think I'm exactly what he expects me to be, lost, overwhelmed, in no condition to manage my own affairs." I looked at Jonathan. A man who trusts people too much. Jonathan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She told me you'd say something like that." "Did she?" she said. He stopped, looked down at the desk. When he looked back up, his eyes were slightly brighter than they had been. He blinked once. When Daniel understands the whole truth, he won't fall apart. He'll get quiet. And when Daniel gets quiet, that means he's already figured out what needs to be done. The room was silent. I stood up. I picked up the wooden box and held it under my arm. "I'll see you Thursday," I said. "For the meeting with Reed. Thursday morning, 8 o'clock, Jonathan said. "I'll text you the address." I walked toward the door. Then I stopped. "Jonathan." I turned. "She talked about me, at work." "All the time," he said quietly. "What did she say?" He smiled, not the professional smile, the real one, the kind that takes a moment to form because it's coming from somewhere genuine. "She said you didn't have much, but you had everything that matters. She said every time she was having a bad day, she thought about the fact that you were going to be home when she got there, and it made everything manageable." I stood in the doorway for a moment, with my wife's box under my arm, and the cold November night on the other side of the glass, and I let that settle into me, the way water settles into dry ground after a long drought. Slow, deep, all the way down. "Thank you," I said. "Go home," Jonathan said. "Get some sleep if you can. And Daniel—" He paused. "She picked the right man." I went home. I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with the box in front of me and the letter against my chest, and I went through every document one more time slowly in the quiet that my wife used to fill just by being present in the room. I thought about a Tuesday evening in October when Elizabeth was supposedly resting and Ryan was supposedly helping, and the television was on in the living room, and somewhere underneath the ordinary sounds of an ordinary evening, my wife was secretly recording the conversation that would protect me after she was gone. I thought about 14 months. I thought about Ryan's hand on my shoulder at the graveside. I thought about what he had said. "Your dad is a good man. He trusts people. That's always been his weakness." And I thought not anymore. 3 days later, I sat across from Marcus Reed in a conference room in downtown Pittsburgh, and I slid the folder across the table, and I said very simply, "Tell me how to build a case." Marcus Reed was a compact, gray-haired man in his mid-50s, with the kind of stillness about him that I recognized immediately, the stillness of someone who spent a career listening for what people weren't saying. He picked up the folder. He looked through it. He didn't speak for 4 minutes. When he put it down, he looked at me and said, "How much access do you have to your own accounts right now?" "Full access," I said. "Ryan hasn't moved on the POA documents yet. He's waiting." Waiting for what? For the grief to set in completely, for me to start asking for help. I looked at him steadily. He's waiting for me to invite him in. Marcus Reed looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "Then that's exactly what we're going to let you do." Marcus Reed gave me 3 rules before we started. The first rule was simple. Say nothing. Not to Emily. Not to Ryan. Not to any family member, any neighbor, any friend who might mention it in passing at the wrong moment. The circle of people who knew what we were doing had to stay exactly the size it was, me, Jonathan, Marcus, and the 2 members of Marcus's team who would handle the financial forensics. That was it. Every additional person was a potential leak, and a leak at this stage wouldn't just damage the case. It would end it. The second rule was, harder act normal. Go through the motions of grief in a way that felt real enough to watch but didn't isolate me from the people I was watching. Accept their calls. Answer their texts. Let them bring food to the house, which they would, because that is what people do, and refuse none of it. Be the man they expected to see broken quiet, grateful for their help. Let Ryan feel like the room was his. The third rule was the hardest of all. Don't react, Marcus said across the conference table, to anything you discover. Not in the moment, not with any of them present. Whatever you find out over the next few weeks, you sit on it. You bring it to me. And we decide together what to do with it. Are you clear on that? I'm clear, I said. I mean it, Daniel. I have worked elder financial abuse cases for 20 years. The single most common way they fall apart is that the victim confronts the perpetrator too early. The confrontation feels necessary and right in the moment, and it destroys the case every single time. I understand, I said. Marcus looked at me with those flat, patient eyes that had spent decades listening to people say they understood things they didn't fully understand yet. I hope so, he said. Because what I'm about to ask you to do is going to test you in ways that grieve you differently than losing Elizabeth did. You're going to be sitting across from people who hurt your family, and you're going to smile at them. And it is going to cost you something every single time. I looked back at him. Marcus, I said, my wife spent the last 14 months of her life sick and in treatment, and still managed to secretly build a legal case against the man who was stealing from us while she was dying. If she could do that, I can do this. A pause. Yeah, he said quietly. She was something. She was everything, I said. Now tell me what you need from me. It was a Thursday morning, 5 days after the funeral. Outside it was gray and cold and Pittsburgh in November, which means the sky looks like it's given up on you personally. Inside that conference room, with Marcus Reed's files spread out on the table between us, and Jonathan Pierce, sitting to my left with his sleeves rolled up and a legal pad in front of him. I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. I felt clear. Not okay. Not healed. Not even close to either of those things. But clear. Like a lens that had been fogged for a long time had suddenly been wiped. Marcus began laying out what his team had found in the 72 hours since Jonathan first contacted him. The LLC registered in Delaware Carter Holdings LLC, which I noted with a grim sort of appreciation for the audacity of using his own name, had received 4 wire transfers from our retirement account over a 14-month period. The transfers had been initiated using online banking credentials and approved with a secondary code sent to a phone number that was not mine. He changed the secondary authentication number, I said. He changed it 11 months ago, Marcus said. About 2 weeks after your wife's first hospitalization. You were likely distracted during that period. I was. I had been at the hospital 4 nights out of 7 for 3 weeks straight during Elizabeth's first treatment cycle. I had barely looked at a bank statement. He waited for the right window, I said. He waited for a window when you'd be too consumed to notice a routine account alert, Marcus confirmed. It's a very common pattern in financial elder abuse cases. The caregiver creates a crisis that absorbs the victim's attention, and while the attention is absorbed, they make their move. He didn't create the crisis, I said. Elizabeth's cancer did. Correct. But he recognized the opportunity and used it, which from a legal standpoint makes it premeditated exploitation. That's a stronger charge than opportunistic fraud. I sat with that for a moment. Premeditated. He had looked at my wife's diagnosis and seen a window opening and walked through it. What else? I said. Marcus turned to the next page in his folder. The power of attorney documents your wife photographed from Ryan's briefcase. We had them analyzed by a forensic document examiner. The signatures on the draft versions are traced from your wife's actual signature on legitimate documents. She had signed insurance forms, medical consent forms, various routine documents that Ryan apparently had access to. He used those as templates. He was going to forge her signature, I said. To get the POA documentation processed, yes. He needed Elizabeth's signature authorizing the transfer of your financial decision-making authority to him, and his plan was to produce a document that appeared signed by her. Jonathan, who had been quiet, said, he would have filed it after she died, claiming she signed it before her death. In your grief dealing with the estate managing the funeral arrangements, it's possible you would have processed a great deal of paperwork without scrutinizing every page carefully. That landed somewhere specific in my chest, because it was true. In the 3 days between Elizabeth's death and the funeral, I had signed 14 things. I knew I had signed 14 things because Emily had brought them to me one at a time with helpful explanations and a pen. And I had signed them the way you do when you're functioning on 2 hours of sleep and the sediment of grief is coating every surface of your mind. I had not read a single one carefully. What did I sign? I said. Marcus shook his head. Nothing harmful. My team went through everything. Emily brought you legitimate documents, death certificate orders, funeral home authorizations, notification forms. She either didn't know about the fraudulent POA at that stage, or she was waiting for Ryan's direction. He paused. We don't yet know exactly how much Emily knows. That's one of the things we need to establish. That question had been living in my chest since I first read Elizabeth's letter. I don't know yet how much Emily knows. Her words, her uncertainty. Even Elizabeth, who had been watching for months and recording conversations and building this case like a quiet, meticulous architect, even she hadn't been able to answer that question cleanly. My daughter. My 34-year-old daughter who had Elizabeth's dark eyes and her stubbornness and who had cried at the graveside in a way that didn't look like performance, that looked like a daughter who had lost her mother. But who had also said on a recording in October, into the ambient sound of her own living room, I still can't believe Mom found out. She knew something. How much was the question? What do I do about Emily? I said. Right now, nothing, Marcus said. Emily is the most complicated piece of this. She may be a co-conspirator, or she may be partially informed but not fully aware of the criminal elements. The distinction matters enormously for what charges are ultimately filed. He leaned forward. Here's what I know about situations like this. The spouse in Emily's position almost always knows more than they've admitted to themselves. People have a tremendous capacity to know something without knowing it, to allow themselves just enough information to be useful without taking in enough to feel guilty. I understood that better than I wanted to. What do you need from me right now? I said. Marcus looked at me steadily. I need you to go home. I need you to call Ryan today. I need you to tell him you're struggling, that you're overwhelmed with the financial paperwork, and that you'd appreciate his help. The silence that followed was short and complete. You want me to invite him in? I said. I want you to make him believe he's in control, Marcus said. Because a man who believes he's in control gets comfortable, and a comfortable man makes mistakes. I called Ryan that afternoon. I sat in Elizabeth's chair at the kitchen table. Her chair, the one with the slight indentation on the left armrest from 30 years of her resting her elbow there while she read, and I called my son-in-law. He answered on the second ring. Daniel, hey. I was actually thinking about calling you today. How are you holding up? Not great, I said, which was true enough that saying it cost me nothing. Ryan, I'm drowning a little bit in paperwork. Insurance stuff. The bank accounts, there are notifications I need to send, and I keep picking things up and putting them down because I can't concentrate. Of course you can't, he said. Warm, immediate, concerned. The performance was seamless. That's completely understandable. Listen, let me come over. I can help you sort through everything. Emily and I were planning to check on you this weekend anyway. I'd appreciate that, I said. I really would. Don't worry about any of it, Ryan said. That's what family is for. I put the phone down on the table and I sat there for a minute and I breathed. Just breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way the hospital counselor had taught Elizabeth in her first round of treatment, and she had taught me because she said I needed it more than she did. Then I went upstairs and changed the password on my online banking account to something Ryan would never guess. And I went to the bank the next morning alone before Ryan came over, and I spoke to the branch manager and put a fraud alert on every account and requested paper statements going forward and added a secondary contact notification, Jonathan Pierce's cell phone number, to receive alerts on any changes to authentication methods. Ryan didn't know I'd done any of that. When he arrived that Saturday with Emily and a grocery bag full of food, neither of them would make, because Ryan Carter did not cook. He found me at the kitchen table with a pile of papers and the look of a man who had no idea where to start. Which was, of course, exactly what we had planned. Okay, he said, pulling a chair close and sitting next to me in a way that felt proprietary, like he was already settling into a role. Let's go through this together. What have you got? Bank statements, I said. Insurance documents. Some things from Elizabeth's attorney that I don't fully understand. Let me see. He reached for the pile. I let him take it. He spent 40 minutes going through the documents with an expression of helpful concentration, that I watched from behind the face of a grieving man who trusted people too much, and I watched him the way I'd spent 35 years watching machines. Looking for the thing that was just slightly off, the gear that turned a fraction too slow, the valve that hesitated before opening. I saw it twice. The first time was when he came to the retirement account statement. A current one. Current balance. Accurate, and his eyes moved across the numbers in a way that was too fast. He already knew what he was looking for. He was checking, confirming. The second time was when he came to a document from Elizabeth's attorney about the will. He stopped. He read it twice. Then he said very casually, "Has the attorney talked to you about the estate process yet? Probate, that kind of thing?" "He called," I said. "I told him I wasn't ready." "Of course." Ryan set the paper down. "But Daniel, whenever you are ready, I'd be glad to go with you, to make sure you understand everything. These processes can be confusing, and you shouldn't have to navigate them alone." I looked at him. I let my eyes go soft, the way they probably looked for real in those first 3 days after Elizabeth died when I was walking through fog. I let him see a man who was grateful. "That means a lot, Ryan," I said. "It really does." He smiled. And underneath the table, where he couldn't see it, my hand curled into a fist. 3 weeks passed. Marcus Reed called me every Tuesday and Friday morning. He had his financial forensics team tracing the LLC transaction chain with a specificity that was apparently extremely unusual for money that had only moved through 3 layers of accounts. Ryan was good at this. He wasn't a professional, he wasn't a criminal mastermind running a sophisticated operation, but he was careful and methodical, and had done enough research to make the transfers difficult to trace without the kind of tools Marcus had access to. But difficult was not impossible. On a Friday afternoon in early December, 3.5 weeks after the funeral, Marcus called me, and I knew from the first syllable that something had changed. "We found the final account," he said. "The money didn't stay in the LLC account. It was moved again twice through 2 business accounts registered to a construction company in Ryan's brother's name." "His brother," I said. "James Carter, lives in Ohio. The construction company appears to be legitimate. It does real work, but there's a secondary account attached to it that receives transfers and then disperses them as what appear to be contractor payments. Except the contractors don't exist." "Ghost contractors," I said. "Ghost contractors," Marcus confirmed. "This is a more sophisticated structure than I expected from him, honestly. He either had help or he researched this very carefully. Does it matter which? Not for the criminal case number. For civil recovery, possibly. But let's focus on the criminal case first." A pause. "Daniel, we have enough for an initial filing. The forensic trail is solid. The forged documents, the unauthorized transfers, the LLC, the dispersal mechanism, it's all there. What we don't have yet is admissible recorded evidence of intent. Something that shows a court unambiguously that Ryan Carter knew what he was doing, understood it was wrong, and did it deliberately. What would that look like?" I said. "Ideally, a conversation. Ryan on record discussing the plan, his awareness of the documents, his awareness of the money." A pause. "Do you have any idea how we might get that?" I thought about it. I thought about Ryan at my kitchen table 3 weeks ago, going through documents with the careful eyes of a man who already knew exactly what was in them. I thought about what Marcus had told me on day 1. A comfortable man makes mistakes. Ryan was comfortable. He believed he was 2 steps ahead of a grieving old man who trusted people too much. "His brother called him last week," I said. "Ryan mentioned it when he was here. He said James was asking about the estate timeline." Silence on the other end. "James is involved," Marcus said. "That was my read," I said. "Okay." Marcus's voice got very focused and very quiet, the way a man's voice gets when the shape of something becomes clear to him. "Here's what I think we need to do. I think we need to create a situation where Ryan believes the estate is moving faster than he expected. That there's a specific decision coming, something about the retirement account, and that if he wants to move on the POA documentation, he needs to do it now." "You want to apply pressure," I said. "Controlled pressure, We create the urgency. He responds to it, and if he's going to bring his brother in or discuss what they've been doing or make any move on the forged documents, he'll do it when he thinks the clock is running. I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "Marcus, I want to do something else first." "What's that?" "I want to talk to Emily, alone, without Ryan, before we accelerate anything." A long pause. "Daniel, I know what you said. I know it's a risk, but Elizabeth wasn't sure how much Emily knew. And if there's any chance at all that my daughter is in over her head and doesn't fully understand what Ryan has done, I am not going to let her find out for the first time in a courtroom." My voice was steady, but something underneath it was not. Elizabeth would not want that. Marcus didn't speak for a moment. "You get one conversation," he said finally. "Carefully. No accusations. No specific details about the investigation. You're just a father who's worried about his daughter. Are you capable of doing that?" "I raised her," I said. "I know how to talk to her." The opportunity came on a Wednesday afternoon. Ryan called in the morning to say he had a client meeting in Philadelphia and would be gone until Thursday. Emily called an hour later to ask if she could bring lunch. I said yes. She arrived at noon with sandwiches from a deli we'd been going to since she was 12, and she sat across from me at the kitchen table in her mother's chair without realizing what she'd done. And for a moment, I couldn't speak because of the way she looked sitting there. Elizabeth's eyes, Elizabeth's way of holding a coffee cup with both hands, Elizabeth's habit of tucking her hair behind her left ear when she was thinking. She was my daughter. She was also somehow the most painful person to look at right now. "You seem different," Emily said after we'd been eating for a few minutes. "I don't mean bad different, just clearer than last week." "Grief does strange things," I said. "Some days I can barely get off the couch. Other days I feel like I can see everything too clearly." She nodded. She looked down at her sandwich. "Emily," I said, "can I ask you something?" She looked up. "How are you and Ryan doing?" A small pause. Too small to be suspicious on its own. But I knew my daughter and I saw her consciously settle something before she answered the way you settle your weight before picking up something heavy. "We're fine," she said. "This has been hard on us too. We were both close to Mom." "I know," I said. "I know you were." I let a moment pass. "Emily, has Ryan seemed stressed lately about finances? About anything?" The pause this time was longer. "Why do you ask?" "I just notice things," I said. Gentle, open. A father, not an interrogator. "He's been very attentive lately, coming over helping with paperwork, asking about the estate. I want to make sure that's not putting pressure on your household." Emily looked at me. Something moved behind her eyes. Something complicated and fast that she shut down before it reached her expression. "He just wants to help," she said. "I know he does," I said. She picked up her sandwich. She took a bite. She chewed slowly. And I watched her the way I'd been watching Ryan looking for the gear that turned a fraction too slow. "Dad," she said, and then stopped. "Yeah." She looked at me. Really looked at me. The way Elizabeth used to look at me when she was deciding whether this was the moment to say the thing she'd been carrying. "Are you okay?" she said. "I mean really okay. Not just are you managing, are you getting through the days? Are you okay?" "I'm getting there," I said. "Are you?" A longer silence this time. "I'm trying," she said, very quietly. And something in the way she said it, the small fracture in it, the weight underneath, told me more than anything she'd said since she walked through the door. She wasn't asking me if I was okay out of obligation. She was asking because she needed someone to ask her back. She was carrying something, and it was heavier than grief. I didn't push. Marcus had been clear. One conversation, no accusations, no specifics. So I let it sit, and we ate our sandwiches, and we talked about nothing for a while. A neighbor's new dog, a show. Emily had been watching a memory of Elizabeth that made us both laugh and then go quiet. But when Emily left that afternoon, she hugged me for a long time at the door. Longer than she needed to. Longer than the occasion required. And she said into my shoulder, "I love you, Dad." "I love you too," I said. She pulled back and looked at me for just a moment. Then she walked to her car without looking back. I closed the door and stood in the hallway, and I thought about what Elizabeth had written. "Your daughter loves you. I believe that with everything I have, but Ryan has had 5 years to work on her. She wasn't wrong. She was never wrong." That evening, Marcus called again. "Something happened today," he said. "What?" "Ryan's brother made a withdrawal from the secondary account. $22,000. Cash." I went very still. "When?" "This afternoon, about 2:30. Emily had left my house at 1:45. Ryan was supposedly in Philadelphia. "He's moving money," I said. "He's moving money," Marcus confirmed. His voice was controlled, but tight underneath the way it got when the timeline was compressing faster than expected. "Daniel, I think someone told him something, or he felt something shift. Either way, he's accelerating." I thought about Emily at my kitchen table. That long look before she answered my question about Ryan. The weight she was carrying. The hug at the door that lasted too long. "It wasn't Emily," I said. "She didn't tell him anything." "You sound certain." "I am," I said. "Then what spooked him?" I thought about it. Then I realized. "Me," I said. "I came into the bank 2 weeks ago. Put a fraud alert on the accounts, changed the authentication contact. If Ryan tried to log in or make a change and got a flag, he'd know someone was onto him," Marcus said. "Or at minimum, he'd feel the ground shift," I said. "Even if he didn't know exactly what happened." "Okay." Marcus was quiet for 2 seconds. "We accelerate. I'm going to contact the Financial Crimes Unit of the DA's office tomorrow morning. We have enough for a formal filing, but I want one more thing first." "The recorded conversation." "The recorded conversation," he confirmed. "Daniel, is there any way to get Ryan in a room in the next 48 to 72 hours? A situation where he might talk?" I thought about it. I thought about Ryan at my kitchen table, going through papers with careful eyes and helpful hands. I thought about what he had said to Emily in October in their living room with the television on. "Once Daniel signs the final papers, everything belongs to us." He needed me to sign something. That was his final step. Whatever documents he'd forged, whatever structure he'd built at some point, he needed my signature on something to legitimize the transfer. And right now, with money moving and the ground shifting underneath him, he was going to want to get that signature as fast as possible. "I'll call him tonight," I said. "I'll tell him I've been going through the estate papers and there are some things I need help understanding, that I want to sit down with him tomorrow." "And in the house," Marcus said, "there will be whatever you need," I said. "Tell me where to put it." I hung up. I sat in the kitchen. I looked at the empty chair across from me, and I said very quietly into the silence that Elizabeth used to fill just by being in it, "I'm not done yet." The next morning, Marcus Reed sent 2 men to my house. They were there for 45 minutes. When they left, there were 3 small recording devices placed in positions that a man going through someone else's kitchen drawers would never find. I called Ryan. "I've been going through everything," I told him, "and I found some documents I need to have explained to me. Can you come over tomorrow afternoon?" "Of course," he said. And I could hear it underneath the warmth, underneath the concern, underneath the perfect performance. I could hear the relief of a man who had been waiting for exactly this. "Thank you, Ryan," I said. "That's what family is for," he said. I hung up. And I thought about Elizabeth in October, recording conversations on her office computer while she was sick and frightened and running out of time. She had built the foundation. Now I was going to finish the house. Ryan arrived at 2 in the afternoon. I heard his car in the driveway before I saw him, that specific sound of tires on gravel that I had heard dozens of times over 5 years of Sunday dinners and holiday visits, and the kind of casual family drop-ins that seem so ordinary when they're happening, and so sinister when you understand what was underneath them all along. I was at the kitchen table when he knocked. Documents spread out in front of me. Coffee cup, reading glasses on. The complete picture of a 63-year-old man who was overwhelmed and needed help. He let himself in through the side door, the way family does. "Daniel," he called from the hallway. "In here," I said. He came in and looked at the table, and his eyes moved across it fast, the same fast sweep I had seen 3 weeks earlier, the sweep that knew what it was looking for before it started. He found the retirement account statement in the stack, and I watched him clock it. Then he looked at me. "You look tired," he said. "I am tired," I said. "Sit down, Ryan. Thank you for coming. Thank you for—" He sat across from me in Elizabeth's chair, and he pulled the stack of papers toward him, and he began going through them with that practiced expression of engaged helpfulness. And I watched him from behind my reading glasses, and I thought about the 3 recording devices Marcus's team had placed in this room, and I breathed slowly, and I waited. "Okay," Ryan said after about 10 minutes of going through papers. "So here's what I think you need to do. The first thing is consolidate. You've got accounts in 3 places right now, the joint checking, the savings, and the retirement. It would be simpler for you to have everything managed through a single point." "That makes sense," I said. "And honestly, Daniel and I say this as family, not as anything else. The retirement account is the one you need the most help with. These investment allocations are complicated. You shouldn't be making those decisions alone, and you shouldn't be paying a financial institution management fees to make them for you when you don't even know if the strategy is right for your stage of life." I looked at him. "What would you suggest?" He leaned back slightly, comfortable. The ground was his. "There are private wealth management options that are much more efficient for someone in your situation. I know a couple of people I could connect you with. And to transfer management, it's actually a pretty simple process. Just needs your signature on a transfer of authority form, and then whoever you designate as your financial agent can handle everything on your behalf." There it was. Transfer of authority. Financial agent. His language was careful, not the specific legal terms from the forged documents, but pointing in the same direction. He was walking me toward it. Slowly, helpfully, with the voice of a man who only wanted what was best for me. "That sounds like a lot to process," I said. "It is a lot," he said immediately. "That's exactly why you shouldn't do it alone. Emily and I have talked about this, actually. We want to be that support system for you, Daniel, going forward. We don't want you sitting in this house buried in paperwork, stressed, not sleeping." He paused. "Elizabeth would have wanted us to take care of you." He used her name. He said her name in this kitchen where she had made coffee every morning for 30 years, and he used it as leverage, and he did not blink. Something moved through me that I will not name, because naming it would not do it justice. I pressed my foot flat against the floor underneath the table, and I held it there. "She would have," I said. "She was always thinking about other people." "She was," Ryan said. He looked genuinely moved for a moment. The performance was extraordinary. "I miss her too." "I know you do," I said. He picked up a document from the stack. "Now this one here, this is from Elizabeth's life insurance policy. Have you been in touch with the carrier yet?" "Not yet," I said. "I haven't been able to face the phone calls." "I can make those calls for you," he said, immediately, naturally. "Just add me as an authorized contact on the account. It's a 2-minute process online, and I can handle all the follow-up. You shouldn't have to deal with insurance bureaucracy right now. Authorized contact on the insurance account. Transfer of financial authority." He was building it layer by layer, the way you build any structure. Start with the foundation. Add the walls, then the roof. By the time it was finished, I was supposed to be inside it without knowing it was built around me. "Ryan," I said, "can I ask you something?" He looked up from the papers. Open face, patient eyes. "Are you and Emily okay financially? I know the business was hard. I know the last couple years haven't been easy." A very brief stillness. "We're fine," he said. "A little stretched like everyone, but fine." "Why?" "Because you're spending a lot of time over here," I said. "Helping me, coming by, dealing with my paperwork. I don't want it to be a burden." "It's not a burden," he said, very smooth, very warm. "Your family." "Good," I said. "I just wanted to make sure." He went back to the papers. I watched him. And then my phone rang. I looked at the screen. Marcus Reed's number. We had agreed he would call at 3:15 with a specific message, and it was 3:17, and I picked up the phone and said, "Excuse me, I have to take this." And I walked out to the back porch and pulled the door mostly closed behind me and answered. "We have a problem," Marcus said. My heart rate went up. "What kind of problem?" James Carter made another withdrawal this morning. $38,000. The account is almost empty. His voice was tight and controlled. If Ryan moves the retirement account funds before we file, we lose the trail. We need the conversation today, Daniel. Whatever he says in that room needs to be enough. Because I'm filing tomorrow morning regardless, but I want what he says today in the record. Understood, I said. How's it going in there? He just suggested I add him as an authorized contact on the insurance account, I said quietly. A pause. He's moving fast, Marcus said. Because he's scared, I said. Something shifted and he knows it. He's trying to lock things in before he loses the window. Then let him try, Marcus said. And Daniel, when you go back in there, I need you to give him an opening. Ask him directly about the retirement account transfer. Use the phrase, power of attorney. Let him lead. And if he walks it back? He won't, Marcus said. He's too far in. He can't afford to walk it back now. I went back inside. Ryan looked up when I came in. Everything okay? That was Elizabeth's attorney, I said, which was not exactly true, but was not exactly a lie either, because I had spoken to Elizabeth's attorney that week, and the general topic of my response was at least adjacent to accurate. He mentioned something about a power of attorney, something Elizabeth may have set up before she died. I don't fully understand what that means. Ryan set down the papers he was holding, very slowly. What did he say exactly? He said. Something about an authorization document. He said there might be one on file that I should be aware of. I looked at Ryan with the expression of a man who needed things explained to him. What is a power of attorney exactly, in terms of our financial accounts? Ryan's left hand on the table moved 3 inches toward the papers and then stopped. It's a document, he said carefully, that authorizes a designated person to make financial and sometimes medical decisions on someone's behalf. If Elizabeth set one up, it would have specified who she trusted to manage those decisions for you. Could she have designated someone without telling me? A pause that lasted 2 seconds too long. It's possible, he said. If she felt she was protecting you from having to deal with complex decisions during a hard time, who would she have designated, do you think? He looked at me, and for the first time since he had walked through the door 2 hours ago, the performance cracked. Not completely, not visibly enough that a stranger would have seen it. But I knew this man's face from 5 years of Sunday dinners, and I saw the crack, a tightening around the eyes, a recalibration happening behind them. Probably Emily, he said. Or both of us, as a couple. Both of you, I repeated. It would make sense, he said. For continuity. So that if you ever needed support, there would always be someone authorized to help you quickly. Ryan. I kept my voice level and confused, and a little bit lost. If that document existed, would it give you access to the retirement account? He looked at me for a long moment, and then he made the mistake that Marcus had said a comfortable man eventually makes. He told me the truth, not all of it, but enough. If the document was structured that way, he said slowly, as if choosing each word from a menu and being very careful about which ones he picked, then yes, the designated agent would have access to manage those funds, on your behalf, to protect your financial future. He paused. That's not a bad thing, Daniel. That's a safeguard. A safeguard, I said. For your protection, he said. Elizabeth would have wanted that. He used her name again. I looked down at the table. I pressed my hands flat against the surface, and then I looked back up at my son-in-law and I said, Ryan, I need to tell you something. Something changed in his face. Just slightly. What's that? He said. I went to the bank 3 weeks ago, I said. I put a fraud alert on all of my accounts. I changed the authentication contact number. I added a secondary notification to a person I trust. I watched his face. I also had a conversation with a financial crimes investigator named Marcus Reed, who has spent the last 3 weeks tracing every transfer out of my retirement account for the last 14 months. The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. Ryan did not move. He did not speak. He looked at me the way a man looks at the ground when it opens underneath him. Not panic, not yet, but the pure physical shock of free fall. "I know about Carter Holdings, LLC," I said. "I know about your brother James and the construction company accounts. I know about the forged signature templates. I know about the draft power of attorney documents you had prepared the week after Elizabeth's diagnosis." He found his voice. "Daniel, I'm not finished," I said. Quiet, even. The way I talked when a machine had broken down, and I needed the room to hear exactly what I was saying. "I know you withdrew $62,000 from my retirement account over 14 months. I know you moved it through 2 shell structures to make it harder to trace. I know you were planning to file fraudulent documentation after Elizabeth died to take control of my financial and medical decision-making." "That is not," he started and stopped. "I also know," I said, "that my wife found out. I know she photographed your briefcase in April and spent the last months of her life building a case against you while she was dying. And I know that she was afraid to tell me, not because she didn't trust me, but because she loved me enough to want the whole truth in place before she let me see any of it." Ryan's hands were flat on the table now, mirroring mine. His face had gone through 3 expressions in 30 seconds and was settling into something I had not seen on him before. Not the warmth, not the helpfulness, not the performance. Something stripped down and cornered. "You don't understand what was happening," he said. "You don't have the full picture." "Then explain it to me," I said. "Right now, the full picture." He looked at me, and then he made the second mistake. He tried to negotiate. "Emily was going to lose everything," he said. His voice was different now, faster, lower, the smooth cadences gone. "The business failed, and we had debt that you don't know about. Daniel's serious debt, and I was trying to find a way to stabilize things before it collapsed around us. And I know how it looks, but I was never going to leave you without resources. I was going to pay it back." "You were going to pay it back," I said. "Once things stabilized. Once we got through the worst of it." "With what money?" He stopped. "The business failed, Ryan," I said. "There was no recovery timeline. There was no plan to pay it back. There was only a plan to take what was mine and structure it so I couldn't prove it. I wasn't going to let you suffer. My wife died," I said. The steadiness in my voice surprised me. "My wife spent the last months of her life sick and frightened and secretly recording conversations in her house because she was afraid of the man her daughter married. That is suffering. That is what you created." I stopped. "Did Emily know?" He didn't answer immediately. That was its own answer. "How much did Emily know?" I said. "She knew we were in trouble," he said. "She knew I was trying to find solutions. She didn't know the specifics. But she knew something was happening with our accounts." He looked at the table. "Ryan, did my daughter know?" "She knew some of it," he said finally, very quietly. "Not all of it. I kept most of the details from her. I told her it was a loan, a temporary arrangement." A loan. He had told my daughter he was borrowing money from her dying mother's retirement account. I thought about Emily at the kitchen table on Wednesday, the weight she was carrying, the hug that lasted too long. "I love you, Dad," set into my shoulder like a confession. She had known it was a loan she couldn't tell me about. She had known there was something wrong, and she had sat across from me with her mother's eyes and her mother's coffee cup and said we're fine when I asked if they were okay. "I need you to leave my house now," I said. Ryan looked up. "Daniel, I am not going to raise my voice," I said. "I am not going to threaten you." I am not going to do anything except tell you that you need to stand up right now and walk out that door. Because in approximately 12 hours, a financial crimes investigator is going to file a formal complaint with the Allegheny County District Attorney's Office, and everything that happens after that point is between you and the legal system. He stared at me. What I suggest you do with those 12 hours, I said, is talk to your wife. Tell her the truth, the whole truth. Whatever version of it you told her was clearly not complete, and she deserves to hear what you actually did before she hears it from someone else. I paused. She's still my daughter. Whatever you did, she is still my daughter, and she is going to need to understand what happened. Ryan stood up. He looked in that moment genuinely young. Not in a sympathetic way. In the way of someone who has played a game at a level above his ability and is only now fully understanding what that means. I'm sorry, he said. Don't. I said. Please. He left. I sat at the table, and I listened to his car back out of the driveway and pull away. And then I sat in the quiet for a long time. Then I called Marcus. He confessed, I said. Not fully. He claimed it was a loan. He admitted Emily knew some of it. He admitted the debt, the plan, the timeline. It's on the recording. All of it, I said. A pause. Daniel, Marcus said. We've got him. I put the phone down on the table. I looked at Elizabeth's chair across from me, the chair Ryan had been sitting in 20 minutes ago, the chair with the small indentation in the left armrest from 30 years of her elbow resting there. I got him, I said quietly. To her, to the chair, to the kitchen that still smelled faintly like the coffee she used to make every morning. We got him. My phone buzzed. A text from Emily. 4 words. Ryan just told me. I stared at the screen. Then another text. Can I come over? I sat there for a long moment with my phone in my hand and my wife's absence filling the room around me, and I thought about what Elizabeth had written. Your daughter loves you. I believe that with everything I have. I typed back 1 word. Yes. She was there in 20 minutes. She came through the side door without knocking the way she always had since she was 16. And she came into the kitchen, and she stood in the doorway, and she looked at me, and her face was, I don't have the right word for it. Destroyed isn't right. Cracked open is closer. Like something that had been held under tremendous pressure had finally been given permission to release. Dad, she said. Her voice broke on the word. Come here, I said. She crossed the room and she sat down in the chair, her mother's chair, the chair she'd sat in her whole life, and I reached across the table, and I took her hands the way Elizabeth used to take mine when she knew I needed grounding, and Emily bent over them and wept. Not prettily, not quietly. The way you cry when you have been holding something for months that was too heavy to hold, and you have finally been given permission to put it down. I sat with her, and I didn't speak, and I didn't judge. When she finally got hold of herself enough to look up at me, her eyes were red and her face was a mess, and she looked like she was 12 years old. I didn't know it was stolen, she said. I swear to you, Dad, he told me it was a loan. He said you'd offered to help us, and that it was arranged and that he was managing the paperwork. And you believed him, I said. He was my husband, she said. I believed him. She started crying again. He said Mom knew, she said. He told me in October he said Mom knew about the arrangement and was okay with it. And then I found out Mom was recording conversations, and I started to wonder, and I asked him, and he said I was being paranoid, that I was stressed from the grief. Emily, I said. She stopped. Look at me, I said. She did. Your mother spent her last months making sure I would be okay. She knew something was wrong and she was sick, and she still built a case because she loved me and she was not going to leave me unprotected. I squeezed her hands. She also wrote that she wasn't sure how much you knew, that she believed you loved me, and she was right about that. She was always right. Emily's chin was trembling. I should have asked more questions, she said. Yes, I said. You should have. I didn't soften it. She needed to hear it. Elizabeth would have said the same thing with more kindness and the same directness. But you were in a marriage with someone who was deliberately keeping you just informed enough to be useful and not informed enough to feel responsible, I said. And that is a very specific and calculated kind of manipulation. I paused. That's not an excuse. It's a context. She nodded slowly. What happens now? She said. Marcus Reed files tomorrow, I said. The DA's office will take it from there. Ryan will be arrested. There will be charges. I watched her face as I said it. It's going to be very hard. There will be media attention probably. People who know you will hear about it. That is going to be painful. I know, she whispered. The question is what you do with the painful part, I said. And that is entirely up to you. She sat there for a long time, my daughter in her mother's chair, with her mother's eyes looking at her hands in mine. I want to testify, she said finally. If they need me. Whatever I know, the things he told me, the conversations, I'll tell them all of it. Something shifted in my chest. Elizabeth had been right about her. She loved us. She'd made a terrible mistake in what she'd allowed to go unquestioned. But she loved us. Okay, I said. Dad, she said. I'm so sorry. I know, I said. Not just for this, she said. For Mom, for the last year. I should have been here more. I should have been sitting in this kitchen more and asking more questions, and she was right here, and I let him make me busy with everything else, and I just... Emily. I said her name quietly, firmly, the way Elizabeth used to say mine when I was spiraling into something I couldn't fix. We don't do that. We don't sit here and list everything we should have done differently. Your mother would not allow it. She almost smiled. She really wouldn't, she said. No, I said. She was ruthlessly practical about guilt. She always said guilt was only useful for about 5 minutes. After that, it was just self-indulgence. Emily did smile then, small and broken and real. That's so her, she said. Yeah, I said. It is. We sat there together at the kitchen table, my daughter and I in the house where she had grown up and where Elizabeth had lived for 30 years. And outside, it was December in Pittsburgh, gray and cold and relentless. And inside, it was very quiet and very still. Not the emptiness of absence, something else. The stillness that comes after the storm has broken and before you've started rebuilding. The stillness of truth. The next morning, Marcus Reed filed the complaint with the Allegheny County District Attorney's Office at 8:47 a.m. By 11 o'clock, I received a text from Marcus with 2 words. He's arrested. I read the text. I set my phone on the kitchen table. I looked at the chair across from me. Elizabeth's chair, and I thought about a cold November morning 35 years ago in a town with one stoplight, a woman in a yellow dress arguing with a pastor and winning. I thought about 38 years of blanket theft and lost reading glasses and coffee cups and notes on bathroom mirrors. I thought about a wooden box with my name on it in blue ink. And I thought about what she had written at the end of her letter. You fix things for a living. Fix this one. Fixed, I thought. Elizabeth. It's fixed. The arrest didn't feel like I thought it would. I had imagined in those weeks of waiting in the nights when sleep wouldn't come, and I sat at the kitchen table, going through documents for the 4th or 5th time. I had imagined it would feel like something landing. Like a door closing. Like the particular relief of a machine that had been running wrong finally correcting itself and settling into the right rhythm. It didn't feel like that. It felt quiet. The same quiet the house had been full of since November. Just a different quality to it now, like the difference between the silence before a storm and the silence after one. Both are silent, but one is waiting and one is over. Marcus called me at noon on the day of the arrest. Ryan was taken into custody at 10:53, he said. He was at his office. They didn't have to go to the house, which I think is better for Emily. A pause. He didn't resist. Didn't make a scene. The detective I worked with said he looked... Marcus paused, choosing the word. Relieved, actually. That's what she said. I sat with that for a moment. Relieved. Maybe I understood that in a way I hadn't expected to. When you carry something heavy for long enough, there is a part of you that wants to be caught. Not the planning part, not the calculating part, but the part underneath all of that. The part that knows the difference between what you're doing and what you should be doing, and that has been exhausted for a long time by the distance between those two things. I didn't forgive him for it, but I understood it. "What happens next?" I said. "Arraignment tomorrow morning. The DA's office is filing multiple counts: wire fraud, elder financial exploitation, forgery, conspiracy. The conspiracy charge includes James Carter." Marcus paused. "With the recording, the forensic financial trail, and Elizabeth's documented evidence, the DA tells me this is one of the strongest cases her office has seen in this category." She used the word airtight. Airtight. Elizabeth had built something airtight from a hospital bed. "Is there anything I need to do today?" I said. "Nothing today. I'll call you before the arraignment tomorrow. The process is going to take months, Daniel. It's not going to be fast. But the outcome, I'm confident in the outcome." Another pause, and then Marcus said something he hadn't said in the entire weeks we'd worked together. "She did a remarkable thing, your wife. Most people in her situation, facing what she was facing physically, with what she'd discovered, most people would have fallen apart or stayed silent. She built you a lifeline." "She always did," I said, "even when I didn't know I needed one." After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. I wasn't thinking about Ryan. I wasn't thinking about the charges or the arraignment or the months of legal process that were waiting ahead. I was thinking about April. The Easter dinner. Elizabeth in the kitchen, after the meal, clearing up, moving Ryan's briefcase to make room, and the folder slipping out. The moment she saw our names on the tab. She was already sick when that happened. Already in treatment. Already in the machinery of a disease that was slowly, and then all at once, taking everything. And she had looked at that folder, and she had made a decision. Not out of anger, not out of vengeance, out of love. The specific, practical, determined love of a woman who had spent 38 years solving problems and was not even at the end going to stop. I picked up my phone. I called Emily. She answered on the first ring. "Dad," she said. Her voice was tight and careful, the way it had been for the last 24 hours, like she was holding herself very still to keep from breaking again. "He's been arrested," I said. "I wanted you to hear it from me before you saw it anywhere else." A silence. "Okay," she said. Just that, okay. I heard everything she couldn't say inside it. The grief, the humiliation, the relief, the shame. The specific devastation of loving someone and discovering that the love was a room with walls you never saw coming. "Emily," I said, "do you have someone with you?" "My friend Carla is here," she said. "She came over this morning when I called her." "Good," I said. "Stay with people you trust. And Emily, the DA's office is going to want to talk to you. When that call comes, answer it. Tell them everything you know. Every conversation, everything Ryan told you, every piece of this you were aware of. Don't protect him. Don't leave anything out." "I won't," she said. "And come for dinner Sunday," I said. "If you want?" A pause that was different from the others. Softer. "Yeah," she said. "I want?" "Okay," I said. "Sunday." I put the phone down. Outside, it was the gray that December does in Pennsylvania. The kind of cold that asks nothing of you except to endure it. Inside it was warm. The furnace was running, the one I had serviced in October, because Elizabeth always said we waited too long to service the furnace, and she was always right. I had done it alone for the first time. Paid the bill. Noted it in the household folder the way she'd always noted it. That was one of the 10,000 small things. The ongoing accounting of a life that had been built for two people and now had to be renegotiated for one. The things I kept discovering every day that Elizabeth had always handled, and that I now handled alone, and that each time in their small, ordinary way, broke something open in me and then closed it again like a wound that was healing but hadn't forgotten it was hurt. But I was doing them. That was the thing. I was doing them. The arraignment was the following morning. I didn't attend. Marcus told me I didn't need to, and that it was better for my mental health to let the legal machinery do what it was designed to do without me sitting in a room watching Ryan Carter's face while his charges were read aloud. I agreed with him. There were things I needed to be present for and things I didn't, and I was getting better at knowing the difference. Ryan entered a not guilty plea. Marcus had told me he would. "They always do at arraignment," he said. "It doesn't mean anything yet." What it meant was that we were going to trial unless Ryan's attorney found a reason to recommend a plea deal, which Marcus told me was possible and perhaps likely given the strength of the forensic evidence. I said I didn't care which way it went, as long as the truth was on record. Marcus said the truth was already on record. He was right. Elizabeth had made sure of that. 3 days after the arraignment, Jonathan Pierce called me. "I want to take you to lunch," he said. "When you're ready. No agenda. I just want to sit across from you and eat a sandwich." "Today works," I said. We met at a diner on the north side of Pittsburgh that Jonathan had apparently been going to since he was a young attorney before he transitioned into business and built an empire. It was a plain, honest place, the kind with laminate counters and coffee that came in a ceramic mug and pie rotating in a glass case by the register. Jonathan Pierce, who could have eaten anywhere in the city, chose this place because Elizabeth had told him once that this was the kind of restaurant Daniel would actually be comfortable in. He told me that when we sat down. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so I did a small compressed version of both and then drank my coffee. "She talked about you constantly," Jonathan said. "You know that." But it was never small talk. She didn't fill silence with stories about you. She mentioned you when it was relevant and when it mattered. And it was always... He paused, turning his mug in a circle on the table. "It was always said with this very specific kind of certainty, like you were a fact, like you were something she had established a long time ago and built everything else around." "She was the same for me," I said. "The exact same." He nodded. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and tell me if it's too soon or too much because I mean it with full sincerity and zero pressure." "Go ahead," I said. "I've been thinking since all of this about the number of people this happens to." He leaned forward slightly. "What happened to you? The financial exploitation, the forged documents, the targeting of a widowed or widowing spouse. It's not rare, Daniel. It's shockingly common and shockingly underreported because the people it happens to are often the people least equipped to navigate the legal system alone. Older people, grieving people, people who trust because they were raised to trust." "I know," I said. "I want to fund something," he said. "A foundation, in Elizabeth's name, that provides legal resources, investigative support, and financial recovery assistance to families dealing with exactly this situation." He held up a hand before I could respond. "I have the infrastructure. I have the attorneys. I have the financial forensics team. I have the relationships with DA's offices in 3 counties. What I don't have is the right name on it." He looked at me steadily. "Her name on it means something, Daniel. It means something real." I looked at him across the diner table. I thought about Elizabeth sitting in this kind of restaurant, in this kind of booth, ordering coffee with both hands around the mug, reading the menu, even though she always ordered the same thing. "What would it do?" I said. "Specifically, families who can't afford a Marcus Reed," Jonathan said. "Families where the exploitation is happening, but there's no Jonathan Pierce to hand over a box full of evidence. Families where the grieving spouse signs the wrong documents because nobody told them what to look for." He paused. "We become that resource, free of charge, accessible, named for a woman who, even when she was dying, refused to let someone she loved be unprotected." The diner was busy around us. Coffee cups and conversations and the sound of plates. Ordinary life continuing in its ordinary way. "Yes," I said. Jonathan looked at me. "Yes," I said again. "Let's do it." He nodded slowly, and something in his expression settled. Like he had been carrying this idea and waiting to see if I was the right person to carry it with him, and now he knew. "I'll have the attorneys draw up the charter," he said. "I'd like you involved in the board, your name alongside hers." "My name isn't going to mean anything to anybody," I said. "It means something to me," he said. And it meant everything to her. We ate our sandwiches. We talked about Elizabeth the way you talk about someone you both loved when enough time has passed that the love is louder than the loss, which is not very much time at all, I'm discovering, if you let yourself do it. Jonathan told me a story I had never heard. About a morning 2 years ago when a board meeting had gone catastrophically wrong. A major investor had withdrawn a deal, had collapsed, the kind of morning that in corporate environments apparently causes grown men to lose their composure entirely. Jonathan had been holding it together until he walked past Elizabeth's desk and she had looked up at him and said without preamble, "Jonathan, go get a glass of water. Sit in your office for 10 minutes and remember that you have solved harder problems than this before breakfast." Then she had gone back to her email. And the infuriating thing, Jonathan said, was that she was right. And I knew she was right. And she knew that I knew. She just didn't bother saying that part. I laughed. It was a real laugh. The first one I had produced that used the whole mechanism that came from somewhere in the chest and felt like it meant something. "That was her," I said. "That was completely her," Jonathan said. We were quiet for a moment. "Are you going to be okay?" Jonathan said. "I mean that as a real question, not a social one." "I'm going to be okay," I said. "Not right away, not all the time, but yeah." I looked at him. She set me up for that too, whether she meant to or not. She left me with enough to do that I can't just sit and dissolve. "She probably meant to," Jonathan said. "Probably." I agreed. The case moved through the legal system the way Marcus had told me it would, slowly, methodically, with the particular grinding bureaucratic patience of institutions that have been processing human wrongdoing for centuries and are in no hurry. The trial was scheduled for the following autumn. In the intervening months, Ryan's attorney made 3 attempts to negotiate a plea agreement, each one more serious than the last, which Marcus said was a reliable indicator that the defense had looked at the evidence and did not like what they saw. James Carter entered a guilty plea in February. Federal wire fraud charges given the multi-state structure of the LLC. He received a suspended sentence and full financial restitution requirements, which Marcus said was lenient, but not unusual for a first offense, where cooperation was offered. The cooperation he offered was testimony against his brother. His own brother. I thought about that. About what it said about the kind of man Ryan Carter was, that when the structure finally came apart, the first person to turn was family. Emily filed for divorce in January. She came and told me in person, sitting at the kitchen table, and she was calm in the way you are calm when a decision has been made that was right and was also devastating, and you've accepted both of those things simultaneously. "I keep thinking I should feel more complicated about it," she said. "And then I remember the recordings. And then I'm not complicated at all." "How are you otherwise?" I said. "Honestly?" She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup, Elizabeth's gesture down to the angle of the thumbs, and I don't think she knew she did it. "I'm angry. And I'm sad. And sometimes I'm angry that I'm sad because he doesn't deserve my sadness." She paused. "And sometimes I think about Mom, what she went through, what she knew. And I think she was sick, and she was scared, and she was still the smartest, bravest person in the room. And then I think I want to be half that." She looked at me. "Is that strange?" "No," I said. "That's not strange at all. That's how she worked. She made people want to be better." "She made it look easy," Emily said. "It wasn't easy, was it?" "Nothing about her was easy," I said. "Everything about her was worth it." Emily nodded slowly. "I want to help," she said. "With the foundation. Whatever you and Jonathan are building, I want to be part of it. I want to do something that means something, something she would have recognized." I looked at my daughter, Elizabeth's eyes, Elizabeth's stubbornness, Elizabeth's way of arriving at the decision that needed to be made and stating it cleanly without drama, as if there had never been any other option. I think she would have had something to say about that, I said. What? She would have said? I paused, hearing Elizabeth's voice in my head so clearly it almost had physical weight. She would have said, "About time." Emily laughed, and it was Elizabeth's laugh, the one that starts quiet and then takes over the room, and it hit me in the center of my chest, like something had opened up, not painfully, but the way a window opens and lets in air you didn't know you needed. The trial happened in October, 11 months after Elizabeth's funeral. I will not pretend it was easy to sit in that room. I will not pretend that watching Ryan Carter in a suit at the defense table, thinner, quieter, the performance finally off, did not cost me something. It did. Everything about it cost me something. The testimony cost me. Hearing the recordings played in open court, Elizabeth's voice in that room, steady and careful and afraid underneath the steadiness that nearly undid me completely. Marcus was sitting behind me in the gallery. He put his hand on my shoulder at that moment without a word, and I pressed my foot into the floor, and I held. Emily testified on the second day of trial. She sat in that witness box, and she looked at the prosecutor, and she told the truth, all of it. Every conversation, everything Ryan had told her, every moment she had chosen to believe him. When something in her had been asking questions, she didn't let herself finish. She did not minimize her own role. She did not protect herself. She sat there with her mother's eyes and her mother's composure, and she told the whole story without flinching. I have never been prouder of her in my life. Ryan's attorney tried on cross-examination to suggest that Emily had been a knowing participant, that the line between victim and co-conspirator was blurry. Emily looked at the attorney and said in a voice that did not waver, "I was told by my husband that the money was a loan my father had offered. I did not know it was taken without consent. I did not know documents were forged. And if I had known, I would have gone to my mother immediately. Because my mother was the most honest person I knew, and I was raised to understand that honesty is not optional." The attorney had nothing to follow that with. Ryan Carter was convicted on all counts: wire fraud, elder financial exploitation, conspiracy, forgery. The verdict came in on a Thursday afternoon. Marcus called me within 3 minutes of the announcement. I was at home at the kitchen table because I had not been able to sit in that room while the jury read it out. I had needed to be home, needed to be in the space where Elizabeth had been. "Guilty on all counts," Marcus said. I closed my eyes. "Sentencing is in 6 weeks," he said. "The DA is recommending 8 to 12 years, given the premeditation, the exploitation of a dying spouse, and the multi-person conspiracy structure. Judge Harrison has a history of maximum sentencing in elder exploitation cases." "And the financial recovery," I said. "Full restitution has been ordered as part of the conviction. The money will come back. Not immediately, these things take time, but it will come back." "Thank you, Marcus," I said, "for everything." "Daniel," he said, "thank Elizabeth. I just followed the trail she laid." I put the phone down. I sat in the kitchen. After a long time, I stood up and I went to the cabinet where Elizabeth kept where I now kept the good coffee. The kind she bought for Sunday mornings and special occasions. I made a full pot. I got 2 mugs out of the cabinet the way we always had, and I poured 2 cups, and I set one on her side of the table, and I sat down with mine. I know how that sounds. I don't care how it sounds. It was the truest thing I could think to do. 6 weeks later, Ryan Carter was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. I was in the courtroom for that one. I sat in the front row of the gallery with Emily on my left and Jonathan Pierce on my right and Marcus Reed directly behind me, and I watched. The judge spoke for several minutes before pronouncing the sentence. "I will tell you what I remember most," she said. "What makes this case particularly grievous is not only the financial harm inflicted on the victim, but the timing and deliberateness of that harm. The defendant began his scheme within weeks of learning that his mother-in-law, a woman who had welcomed him into her family, had received a terminal diagnosis. He used the period of her illness as cover. He used her family's grief as a mechanism. And but for the extraordinary foresight and courage of Elizabeth Whitmore, who documented this exploitation while facing her own death, the defendant would very likely have succeeded. This court honors that courage with its sentence. I sat very still through all of it. When it was done, when the room began to move again, Emily took my hand and held it. I let her. We walked out together. The Elizabeth Whitmore Foundation for Family Financial Protection launched the following spring. Jonathan had kept his word, as I had known he would. I was learning the thing about Jonathan Pierce that Elizabeth had understood from the beginning, the reason she had trusted him with the box and the instructions, and the most important task she'd ever assigned anyone. He kept his word. The launch event was small and purposeful. No fanfare, no ceremony, because Elizabeth would have found ceremony excessive, and I agreed with her. A press release, a website, a dedicated legal team and financial forensics unit accessible at no cost to families facing exploitation. A hotline staffed by people who understood both the legal complexity and the human devastation of what it felt like to be targeted by someone you loved. In the first 3 months, we received calls from 47 families. 47. In 3 months. In one region of one state. I thought about that number a lot. About all the people sitting at kitchen tables that looked like mine with documents they didn't understand, and grief that was being used against them, and no wooden box waiting in a CEO's safe to save them. Elizabeth had built one lifeline. We were building 47. And more. Marcus Reed joined the Foundation's advisory board. He brought 2 former colleagues from his years in the DA's office. Jonathan hired a full-time director with a background in social services and elder law. Emily, after her divorce was finalized, and she had put some distance between herself and the worst of it, came on as a volunteer coordinator. She was good at it, better than good. She had her mother's organizational instincts and her father's stubbornness, which turned out to be a highly effective combination in nonprofit work. One afternoon in late spring, about 6 months after the launch, Emily and I were working at the kitchen table together, my kitchen table in the house where she had grown up, sorting through intake forms from families who had contacted the foundation. And she looked up from what she was reading, and she said, "Dad, this one is exactly what happened to us." She slid the form across the table. I read it. Widower, 68 years old. Adult child spouse gradually taking control of financial accounts in the months following a spouse's death. Power of attorney documents filed without full understanding of their scope. "Call them today," I said. "I was going to," she said. She picked up the phone. I watched my daughter make the call, watched her voice steady and warm and practical on the other end of it, watched her write down details with her mother's handwriting, the same small, careful block letters, and tell a 68-year-old man that he was not alone, that what was happening to him was not his fault, and that there were people who knew exactly how to help. I couldn't speak for a moment. I just watched her. When she hung up, she looked at me and saw my face, and she said, "Dad, don't." "I'm not," I said. "You are." "I'm not," I said. "I'm fine." She reached across the table and put her hand over mine for a second. Just a second, the way Elizabeth used to a quick, firm press that meant "I see you," and then she went back to her paperwork. I went back to mine. I think about Elizabeth every day. That will not change. It is not supposed to change, and I have stopped waiting for the grief to become something smaller. It doesn't get smaller. It gets different. It becomes less like a wound, and more like a room you have furnished and learned to live in. Somewhere you didn't choose to be, but that is yours now, and that has things in it that matter. The memories, the years, the particular shape of someone who was the truest fact of your life for 38 years. I talk to her sometimes, at the kitchen table, at the cemetery on Sunday mornings when I bring coffee in a thermos, because she always said cemetery visits shouldn't require suffering through bad diner coffee. And I buy good coffee now, the kind she kept for Sundays and special occasions. And I bring 2 cups even there because some habits are not habits, they are just who you are. I tell her about the foundation, about the families we've reached, about Emily, about how she is becoming slowly, and not without pain, the woman that Elizabeth always knew was inside her, waiting for the right pressure to bring her out. I tell her about Jonathan, who has become one of my closest friends, in a way that I would not have predicted, And that feels like one of the stranger gifts of the worst year of my life. I tell her about Marcus, who sent me a Christmas card last year with a handwritten note that said, "Only she picked the right man to protect." I tell her I'm okay. Because I am. Not the way I was before she got sick, that Daniel Whitmore is not coming back, and I have made my peace with that. But okay in the way that matters. Standing, moving, building things, fixing things. She trusted me to do that, and I have learned slowly, painfully, one document and one phone call and one Wednesday lunch and one 47 family intake form at a time, that the right way to honor a love like hers is not to preserve it in amber. It's to let it keep working. That's what love does when it's real. It keeps working. Even after it's gone. Even when the person who carried it is gone. It stays in the room. It stays at the table. It keeps its hand over yours for just a second, just long enough, and says, "I see you." And then it gets back to work. Elizabeth Ann Whitmore did not lose her battle. She finished it. She built the case. She left the box, she trusted the right people. And she gave me what I needed to walk out the other side of the worst year of my life, standing on solid ground. She protected me before she left, and she gave me the tools to protect others after. That is not a tragedy. That is a life. That is what love looks like when it refuses to stop. And because of her, because of a wooden box with my name on it in blue ink, because of a woman in a yellow dress who argued with a pastor and won because of 38 years of blanket theft, and lost reading glasses and coffee cups, and notes on bathroom mirrors, and a voice that told the truth in rooms full of people who were lying, because of all of it, and all of her, I am still here. Still standing. Still building. Still hers.